After a historic day on Capitol Hill, we begin this morning down Pennsylvania Avenue at the White House, where in just a short while, congressional leaders will meet with the president for a second time this week to try to negotiate an end to the partial government shutdown, now in its 14th day.
Yeah, the Democrat-controlled House passed 2 bills to reopen the government yesterday, neither of which the Republican-led Senate is expected to move forward with. Both provide no money for the president's border wall, despite his demands for $5.6 billion. The new Congress, which was sworn in yesterday, is the most diverse in our nation's history. And for the very first time, there are more than 100 women serving in the House of Representatives. California Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi assumed her role as Speaker of the House, making her the most powerful woman in U.S. politics for a second time. Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill with more on this historic new Congress.
Joint resolution is passed.
House Democrats flexed their new political muscle as soon as they took the majority, passing bills last night to end the shutdown and daring the Senate to follow suit.
Take yes for an answer. Open up government.
But the Senate's Republican leader rejected the bills.
I would call it political theater.
Because they do not include funding for the president's proposed border wall.
You can call it a barrier, you can call it whatever you want, but essentially we need protection in our country.
President Trump spoke in the White House briefing room for the first time ever Thursday, flanked by Border Patrol personnel.
I said, let's go out, see the press, you can tell them about the importance of the wall. They basically said, and I think I can take the word basically out, without a wall, you cannot have border security.
I can personally tell you from the work that I have done on the southwest border that physical barriers, that walls actually work.
The stalemate over wall funding cast a shadow on what was otherwise a day of celebration for Democrats.
To the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, I extend to you this gavel.
California's Nancy Pelosi regaining the Speaker's gavel, swearing in the most diverse Congress ever.
So help you God.
Including the 2 first Native American women and the 2 first Muslim women. Democrats passed new rules to allow religious headwear on the House floor, and they'll soon create a select committee on climate change.
The American people understand the urgency. The people are ahead of the Congress. The Congress must join them.
The party's next goal, a package of campaign finance, anti-corruption, and voting reforms. Democratic leaders vowing to begin investigating the Trump administration right away.
You know what's been happening with families separated at the border.
Some members want to go further and vote on articles of impeachment against the president. This was new Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib at a gathering last night.
We're going to go in there, we're going to impeach them.
The most pressing problem right now, how to resolve the shutdown that has closed federal agencies, prevented garbage pickup at national parks, and forced some furloughed workers to put off paying for medicine and rent.
At some point, do you have to give the president what he wants, if only because there are hundreds of thousands of federal workers who can't afford to go without a paycheck
The president cannot hold public employees hostage because he wants to have a wall that is not effective. The president has said Mexico's going to pay for this. Come on, let's anchor ourselves into reality. Mexico is not going to pay for this wall, so no.
So Nancy Cordes is joining us now from Capitol Hill. And Paula Reid, you are at the White House. We're going to be speaking with both of you, but I'm going to start with Nancy. In one of her first acts as Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi invited President Trump to deliver the State of the Union address a little later on this month. And she wrote this in her speech. She said that the Constitution established the legislative, executive, and judicial branches as co-equal branches of government to be a check and balance on each other. In any other time, I think this would not even stand out as anything special in a speech, but we're living in interesting times. And now we have the Speaker of the House is presiding over a Democrat-dominated House. And can you talk a little bit about the dynamic of the relationship between the Speaker of the House and the President now?
Sure. I mean, this is a point, and you really keyed into it, that the new House Speaker has been making over and over again in the past 48 hours or so. She said it in her maiden speech on the House floor yesterday, that the House and Senate are co-equal with the White House. And the reason that she has been so adamant about making that point is because she's trying to send a message to Republicans in Congress, particularly Republican leaders leaders who weren't necessarily looking for this fight over border wall funding, who don't feel as strongly as the president does in many cases that this wall needs to be built. What she's trying to say to those Republican leaders is, hey, stand up to the president and reopen government. You know that he doesn't need this wall funding. You know that you support reopening the government because the Senate actually voted to do just that a couple of weeks ago, and it was unanimous among Republicans and Democrats. So it's a bit of brinksmanship here. She's trying to say to Republicans in Congress, you can stand up to the president from time to time, even if he's a member of your own party, because Congress has the power to go ahead and pass these bills to fund the government and then essentially dare the president to veto bills that have been passed by both the House and the Senate.
Paula, you actually asked White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders about this earlier today. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
We think we're hopeful because the people that elected Nancy Pelosi didn't elect her to come up here and do nothing, and didn't elect her to play political games. They elected her to find real solutions and actually work with the president and work with all members of Congress to get things done. So we're hopeful that she, as Speaker, will do that. Look, she's got a huge challenge on her hands. She has to figure out, this will be a big test of leadership for Nancy Pelosi. Can she bring the parts of her party together and come up with a solution that the president's willing to sign?
So why does the White House think the president can work with this new House Speaker?
It's a great question. And for weeks, they've been saying that the reason Nancy Pelosi wasn't willing to compromise or bend on funding for a physical border wall is because she was worried about her speakership. They argue that she was concerned she could alienate some liberal bloc voters and jeopardize her speakership. And then after she secured that position, then she would be able to come to the table. But that's a pretty big assumption. And that's why I asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders there why they believe that's true. And in her answer, the fact is, it belies the fact that many people voted for Nancy Pelosi and other representatives specifically because they wanted them to come here and obstruct a lot of President Trump's agenda. So her statement there that she was elected to come here and make deals with the president, that just is not grounded in fact.
So last night, the House passed a package to reopen the shuttered parts of the government. That's what she said she was going to do. First order of business. It would fund some of the government until September. They also voted to fund DHS through early next month to allow negotiations on this border security to continue. The Senate said they're not interested in signing anything that they don't believe the White House or the president will sign. But what's the White House response been?
That's right. The White House took a hard pass on this particular measure. They've said, look, the president is not going to sign anything that does not fund a physical border wall. And what's also interesting is we spoke with Sarah Huckabee Sanders about this as well. And we asked her, we pressed her on this question of, well, why can't you just let some of these Department of Homeland Security components go forward with their work while you continue to negotiate? And she says that the president does not want to, quote, kick the can or the ball any further down the lane, that he wants a solution. They don't want any more delays. Now, what's also interesting, though, is we saw two Republican senators, both of whom are up for re-election in 2020, sort of break with the president and party leadership on this issue and suggest that perhaps it is time to solve this, even without funding for a physical border wall. Now, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he still insists that he will only put forward anything that the president will sign, but you are starting to see breaks within the party. It's unclear, though, whether or not that would apply enough pressure to the president to back off of his multi-billion-dollar demand for funding.
Nancy, I'm going to do what you all do at these press briefings. I'm going to ask two questions. You have to remember both of them. First, okay. Do you think this is really just a matter of semantics, that eventually the word wall will be dropped and they will get their security, they'll get a barrier, something like that? And question number two, congressional leadership is going to head to the White House later this morning to continue those negotiations. So in the wake of yesterday's bill, do you think we're going to see any progress?
Okay, so first of all, I'm very disappointed that you've clued in to some of our tactics and revealed them on air, asking the two questions at once. But you're trying to get a couple bites at the apple all in one fell swoop. But anyway, that aside, so in response to your first question about whether the president will drop his demand for actual wall funding and he'd be satisfied with something else, some other form of border security, one of the big challenges here is that no one really seems to know what he would be satisfied with at the end of the day. They're not even clear that he really has a firm idea in mind of what he would accept and what he wouldn't. This has been a challenge in previous negotiations as well. You saw the vice president come up here to Capitol Hill, for example, and float the idea of, okay, instead of $5 billion for the wall, how about $2.5 billion for the wall? You would think that if the vice president was coming here and making that offer, that this is something that the White House had discussed and that the president was behind. Lo and behold, the president a few days ago said, oh, no, we will not accept $2.5 billion. I want 5.6. So there's even disagreement between the president and the vice president about what he will accept, what he will sign. And so that makes negotiations between Democrats and Republicans here on Capitol Hill extremely difficult. And that's why you have a lot of Democrats saying, hey, we shouldn't give anything at all, because if we give in this situation, then what's to stop him from holding out in future negotiations or changing the parameters of the deal in any situation? So that is part one. Now on to part two about the conversations that are taking place today. Democrats are really in something of a bind here. On one hand, they have shown a willingness in the past to go along with border wall funding. In fact, a lot of border wall funding. Just last year, Chuck Schumer, the lead Democrat in the Senate, said he put $20 billion of border wall funding on the table in exchange for legalization for the Dreamers, young people who were brought to this country illegally as children. And so Democrats have shown in the past that they're willing to barter on wall funding. So the question from the White House, unsurprisingly, is why won't you do it this time? And so that's the problem that we see shaping up. The reason that Democrats aren't going for it this time is because Republicans really, and the White House haven't put anything on the table that would make up for it. So the Democrats don't want to give away this leverage unless they're getting something big in return. They say that that's not a chip that they want to bargain away just to do something that the government should be doing anyway, which is funding itself.
Yeah, Nancy, you make a great point about this wall and how it's changed and how you're supposed to negotiate a price tag on something when you don't know if it's a wall or a fence or a metaphor for border security, or how much does a metaphor cost? I'm not sure, but maybe billions. But Paula, I wanted to talk to you about yesterday's press briefing, right? In the midst of a historic day on Capitol Hill, the White House, the president made a surprise appearance in the press briefing. Nobody knew he was coming out. Everyone had to sort of scramble to get in place. The timing was certainly coincidental.
Yes, perhaps drawing a little attention away from something else that happened.
Right. He was flanked by Border Patrol union leaders. What was the point of yesterday's appearance? Because he took no questions from the press, which is usually what happens in the briefing room.
That's right. That is what we expect of you when you enter the briefing room, that you will take a few questions in exchange for all the attention and exposure that we're giving you. But there have been instances where a president has come into the briefing room and not taken questions. But this was described as a press briefing. There was an expectation that we could ask him some questions. We did not get that opportunity. Instead, the president repeated a lot of familiar talking points. And it was the second time in 48 hours where we heard from the president, where he took his case to the American people. It appears that he is sort of feeling the heat. A plurality of Americans believe that he is responsible for the shutdown, but it's unclear whether or not this appearance or his 100-minute-long cabinet meeting the other day, whether or not this is really changing the hearts and minds of not only the people not getting their paychecks, but also all those Americans who hold him accountable for the shutdown. So it was clearly meant to make a splash, detract attention from Nancy Pelosi's a big day, but the bigger purpose is to make his case to his supporters, that small percentage of Americans who really want this specific campaign promise delivered. It's just not clear whether or not these media opportunities are getting the job done.
Yeah, a good reminder of the real people that are being impacted by this shutdown.
Yes, absolutely.
Nancy and Paula, thank you.